and welcome to Nominations and Elections. It's a mystery to me. Thank you for joining us for this very, very important webinar. For all things nominations and elections, see the New York State Resource Guide, Section 7. You click on the website, go on the Leaders tab, and then click on Resource Guide, and it will take you to Section 7. And again, this presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the New York State website. The importance of the nominating committee is that everyone in the membership needs to understand the process, not just your leadership, but all of your members, so that you can ensure transparency when conducting an election. So the first thing is that you must elect a nominating committee. All members must be elected in accordance with your unit's bylaws, and that must be at least 60 days prior to your election, but it can be at any time prior to that 60 days. Your bylaws will specify the total number of members of the committee, how many are elected from the executive board, and how many from the general membership, and if an alternate is elected. Once the committee is elected, the committee elects its own chair. And according to Robert's rules, the first named member of the committee acts as a temporary chair to allow for the committee to elect a chair. And this is a special committee, not a standing committee. A special committee is a committee that is tasked with a specific role, and once that role is completed, then the committee is no longer in effect. Election of the committee. The best option, of course, is to have a live meeting for the election of the committee. And you will need representation from both the executive board and the general membership. The meeting can be held on the same day, executive board at 7 p.m., and then call your general membership meeting at 7:30. If available, you could consider having a hybrid meeting to allow participation from more members. Our New York State website has previously presented webinars on virtual nominations and elections and technology tools for additional information and assistance if you need to have a hybrid meeting or a virtual meeting. And we are okay. It is okay to have a virtual meeting if you cannot meet in person. And that's very important because this is a very important part of your PTA that needs to be completed. Calling the nominating committee meeting. The chair of the committee will select the time and place for the meeting that all members are able to attend. Only the elected members of the committee may attend. And again, this nominating committee meeting can be virtual, but again, only members of the committee may attend. If an alternate is elected, if your bylaws indicate that, they will only attend if another member is unavailable. This meeting should be held in a private setting, free from distractions. Having it in a school is not always the best option because too many people can come in and out of a room. Certainly your library may have a private room for you to use, but probably someone's home is the best setting. Or, as I said, a virtual meeting if necessary. A copy of the bylaws must be available. Recommendation forms should be sent out by the chair to the membership. And you can use a Google form for this, or you can send hard copies home to be mailed directly to the chair. If you use a Google form, it is suggested that your nominating committee chair have a specific email just for the nominating committee, so that the forms can be anonymously sent to that email, and there is no worry about other emails coming and going, or people being, or other emails coming into that email. So it's probably a good idea whether you use a Google form or whether you use a hard copy, that the nominating committee has its own email going to the chair so that the nominating committee can communicate with their committee. A nominating chair can communicate with their committee very directly through that email, and it's only used for the nominating committee, and that's it. And certainly the chair should have a current copy of the membership list because all nominees must be a member of the association in order to be elected. Here's a sample recommendation form you could use. name of the PTA, then you would have each office in turn where a person can write in a suggested name and then list some qualifications and comments about that person. And you can also do that for each successive office that is going to be elected. Your bylaws will also state the following: the officers to be elected and their term of office. If the council delegates are appointed, or if they are elected by the membership or by the executive board, the month of the election meeting and when the proposed slate of officers should be published. And finally, if there is a 2-day requirement for notice to run from the floor. So here's a sample bylaws from a unit, and I've highlighted those areas that the committee should make sure that they are looking at when they get their bylaws, when they get their committee together. So first of all is, who are the officers of this association? And this particular unit has a president, 8 vice presidents, a recording secretary, a corresponding secretary, and a treasurer. Your unit, of course, will have different officers, but the minimum number of officers must always be a president, a secretary, and a treasurer. So that is up to your unit's bylaws to let you know that. The next thing is they are elected by ballot annually at a regular meeting in the month of April. Again, that is a choice that your unit will make. When do you want to have your election meeting? And it can be March, April, May, or June. However, if there is only one nominee for that office, then the vote is by voice vote. And we'll go over elections in a bit. These officers on this in this unit serve for a term of 1 year or until a successor is elected. So it's 1 year, and they are eligible to serve 2 consecutive 1-year terms. And here's information on the makeup of the nominating committee. The nominating committee consists of 9 members, 2 of whom shall be elected by the executive board from its body, and 7 who shall not be members of the executive board, elected by the association at least 60 days prior to the election meeting. So all of this information is in your unit's bylaws. Every president, every secretary should have a copy of the bylaws at every meeting. Any unit member can ask to see a copy of the bylaws at any time. If for some reason you do not have a copy, you can go to your bylaws, region bylaws chair, who will assist you in getting a copy. Here's additional information about the nominating committee. Here again, we're using this particular unit, okay, that their nominating committee reports at the regular meeting of the association in April. That's their election month, okay, at which time additional nominations may be made from the floor. See letter F, we'll get to that in a minute. And the nominating committee will publish the report 2 weeks prior to the meeting. And that's very important because your report of the slate must be published either 2 weeks or 1 month prior. Again, what's in your bylaws is what you will use. And here is the additional F, which is not in everyone's bylaws. It says additional nominations may be made provided that written consent of the nominee has been secured and the chair has received notice at least 2 business days prior to the election. Again, you may or may not have this particular clause in your bylaws, but you need to know whether or not you do. And finally, council membership. If your unit is part of a council, in this particular unit, they have just 1 council delegate. And this also then shows, how the council delegates are chosen, and they are appointed by the president in cooperation with the executive committee. So this, in terms of the council delegates, is not going to be necessary for the nominating committee to recommend any council delegates. You can also have, if you don't have appointed by the president, they could also be elected by the executive board, or sometimes you also will see elected by the membership in the same time as the officers. So you have to, again, look at your bylaws to see what they state in terms of your council delegates. Very important. So now we have our bylaws. We've looked up everything we need to do as far as the committee and who we need to nominate, recommend. So recommendation forms would be opened only at the meeting in presence of the committee members only. These are confidential, but they are for information only. So it gives every member who may or may not know everybody in the PTA a chance to take a look at some of the names that are being considered and a little bit about those people. You will deliberate on who the best candidate will be for each position. If a member of the nominating committee is being considered for office, they should leave the meeting during the discussion. And even if you're having a virtual meeting, they can just log off and then somebody can text them to log back on after that discussion has happened. Consider the kind of leadership that will best achieve the aims and purposes of your PTA. And review the tenure of incumbent officers to determine their eligibility. Remember that they are eligible, not entitled, for another term in the same office or in another position. All officers' terms are for 1 year, unless a 2-year term is specified in your bylaws. No person should be automatically nominated for a second term. And I've heard so many times that, well, she's only had 1 year, so she can get another year. Yeah, she could, or he could, but please make sure that they still must be nominated and elected, even if they are eligible for a second year in that same office. That's very, very important. You still leave it up to the general membership to vote on their officers each year. And avoid reshuffling the officers. And that does nothing to foster your leadership. And what happens is when those officers have done every office and every term, and now their children leave the building, where is your new leadership going to come from? So we always try to encourage to have a good variety and to not just keep the same officers changing over and over again. This is so important. All deliberations should be kept confidential. It just makes sense. You're discussing people, you're discussing their ability to lead, you're discussing their ability to be a president or vice president or secretary. And those discussions are meant to be confidential. So once a candidate has been agreed upon by the committee, the chair will call the potential nominee. When they have received verbal acceptance from all the nominees, they will contact the president so the proposed slate can be published for the membership according to the bylaws. This is done by the president. How do you publish it? You send it out via a newsletter, via Facebook, whatever way that you communicate with your membership, that is what you're going to do here. The proposed slate should be kept confidential until all nominees have accepted and the announcement has been made. Now, this is important because you're not going to have somebody on the phone who says to you when you call them, well, we'd like to nominate you for president. Well, who's going to be vice president? No, okay? If that person wants the president, it should not matter who the other officers are. And if it does, then maybe that's not the best choice for that position. You do not discuss the nominees, the other nominees, with any nominee who accepts. They will find out when everybody else does. So that's unfair to the nominees, and it's unfair to the people who might potentially be nominees. The chair will need to send a formal acceptance letter to each nominee that should be signed and returned to the chair. And then the committee should complete a final written report that's signed by each member of the committee and is included in the minutes of the election meeting. And if the nominating committee for some reason cannot find a person to fill that office, then that would be considered an open position and they would still make their report, but that position would then be dealt at the election meeting. So here's a sample of what you would put in a nominating committee report: the date of the meeting, the names of each nominee by office, and then the names and signatures of the members of the committee. Okay, and this is what is going to get handed into the secretary for her minutes at the election meeting. And here's a letter of acceptance, which would need the name of the nominee. I agree to accept the nomination to the office of whatever the office is for the blank year, and their signature. So we have in writing that this person has agreed to accept the nomination. If for some reason they are unable to attend the election meeting, you have a written confirmation that they will indeed accept the position. So here's a sample nominating committee report that could be sent to the membership. Again, this is done by the president once they have all the nominees in place. And again, either 2 weeks or 1 month prior to the election meeting. The bylaws we just looked at said 2 weeks before the election meeting. So you list the names of the members who have been nominated for the 2022-23 school year, name of the president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, whatever the offices are that you have. Along with that, then you will also put information on the election meeting. And here it says the election of officers will take place on our meeting on April 25th. Again, month of April was the election meeting. You must be a member in order to vote in the election. Membership will be accepted until 5 p.m. on April 23rd. There are no absentee ballots. You must be present in order to vote. Now, giving a date for membership is important because you do not want people coming in that day, 5 minutes before the election, signing up for membership. And the fact that we do membership by Member Hub makes it very easy for anyone who wishes to. Once they're getting this notice 2 weeks prior to the election, they have plenty of time, even if they don't go on Member Hub, to bring a check up to the school for membership. So it just makes the job of the membership chair that much easy, not trying to scramble at the last minute to get a complete membership list. According to our bylaws, notice of intent to run from the floor must be received at least 2 business days prior to the date of the election, and intent to run notices must be received by your nominating committee chair by 5 p.m. on April 23rd. And that would be 2 days prior to your election. And they have to be in writing. So you have an email, that's fine. The nominating committee prints out the email to show that this person was interested in running from the floor. Well, what happens if the committee cannot fill an office? Then that office becomes an open position and will be addressed at the election meeting. So let's say you come up with a slate, but you could not find anybody for vice president. So that becomes an open position and it is taken up at the election meeting. What happens if a nominee who has accepted the nomination must withdraw their name? Okay, what do you do? Well, if it's prior to the election meeting, the committee can reconvene and consider another nominee. Or if there is no time for the committee to meet because the election meeting is literally 2 days away, then again, it will be considered an open position and be addressed at the election meeting. And this would be a case where with an open position like that, that nominations from the floor can be taken even if there is a 2-day notice required, because it was not the fault of the nominating committee that they couldn't find a position, nor was it the fault of a person who had to withdraw their name for personal reasons. And what about if a nominee has already been elected and resigns? Then it becomes a vacancy and is filled by a vote of the executive board. So let's get on to the election meeting. The nominating committee has done their role, done their job. They've nominated the candidates for election. The election meeting has been published with the nominees in hand, and now the date of the election is coming up. So notice of the date should be made at least 30 days prior to the date of your election meeting. Now, at the beginning of the year, you publish a calendar. That calendar should be out there for all your members to see right away. And if changes are made, obviously, then those need to be communicated. But when you publish the dates, make sure that you highlight that April date, in this case, as being the election meeting. So now everybody knows that that will be the date of the election meeting. It is a general meeting so that anyone can attend who's a member. But it's a good idea to announce it right from the beginning so that people know exactly when it is and nobody can ever say they did not know it was the election meeting. And that I've heard many, many times. Follow the guidelines. Again, Resource Guide Section 7 has guidelines for elections. This is a general membership meeting, and those present who can vote must be a member of the association. So it's important that a current membership list is available from the membership chair. And lastly, you want to make up a set of meeting rules that can be sent along with the agenda so that there's no question about how this election is going to be run. It not only helps the presiding officer with an agenda to know how exactly she's going to run the meeting, but it also gives guidelines to the general membership to say, this is how we're going to do things so that there's no confusion when it comes time to, how are we going to conduct this election? So here's some possible meeting rules, okay? And again, these are approved by the executive board and written into your procedures. So one would be, if there's one candidate for an office, the election will be by voice vote. If there's more than one candidate for an office, the election will be by ballot vote. And both of those items are listed in your bylaws. Each candidate will be allowed a 2-minute statement stating the reasons for qualifications for running for office. 2 tellers will be appointed to count the ballots and certify the election. Voting will close immediately after all ballots have been collected. Election will be by majority, and election results will be announced as soon as possible after the balloting is finished. So these are possible rules. Your executive board would come up with procedures, would come up with rules and add them to your procedures, and they get approved by the executive board. But again, it's good to have kind of a scenario as to what's being done and how it's being done for the election. So the first thing with an election meeting is to make sure that you have a quorum. And again, that's something that is in your bylaws. And of course, that the secretary is taking accurate minutes. So the first scenario would be there are no candidates running from the floor, okay? If no one is running from the floor, then your election can be by voice vote, according to your bylaws. So the nominating committee chair makes their report and announces the proposed slate of officers, and the signed report is filed with the secretary's minutes. This is the end of the nominating committee's work. Remember, I said it's a special committee, and their role is finished once a nominating committee report is made at the election meeting. The president will then announce each office in turn and allow for a voice vote each time. So for example, for the office of president, the nominee is Joe Santos. All in favor say aye. You have elected Joe Santos as your president. Congratulations. Under Robert's rules, when there is but one candidate for an office, that candidate is declared elected. Members can only vote against a candidate by nominating an alternate candidate. So you don't say all those in favor, all those opposed. It is just all those in favor say aye. And truly, Joe would only need one vote to be elected. So it's kind of a moot point that there's no such thing as a no vote when you have only one candidate. And once all the candidates have been elected, you have completed your election. Obviously, this is the simplest election to complete. However, they're not always so simple. So scenario 2 is where a candidate or candidates have given the required 2-day notice of intent to run from the floor. That's that letter F that we saw in the bylaws. The secretary should have ballots and teller sheets, okay, to tally the results. And because you will know who the candidates will be prior to the election meeting, these ballots can be prepared in advance. So that's kind of a helpful thing that we can use as part of that 2-day notice. It is why a lot of units will do that. And in fact, all the regions, most of the regions will do that. And of course, New York State has a required amount of time for notice to run from the floor. The membership chair must have a current membership list available. Again, you're going to be handing out ballots, so they can only go to people who are members. So the same as in the past, in the previous election, the nominating committee chair will read the proposed slate of officers, and they will announce any notices of intent to run from the floor. And taking one office at a time, the president will conduct the election, either by voice vote if there is only one person, or by ballot vote if there is more than one person for an office. Again, these is when the candidates have given their 2-day notice, whether for each office or for one or two of the offices, to run from the floor. Any office for which there is more than one candidate must have a ballot vote, and each office should have a separate vote. Again, you want to give each person, even when you do a voice vote, you want to announce each office individually, because you're now recognizing that person who is stepping up to a leadership role, and you want to announce that and congratulate them individually instead of doing, let's take all the offices at once. It's much nicer, and I think a better way to congratulate people who are willing to step up to be your leaders. If there is more than one candidate, they can be given the opportunity to speak according to the meeting rules, as we've said before. And again, now you have a ballot, so therefore the instructions might be a little different. You know, the president might say, check only one name on the ballot, fold the ballot in half, hand it to the tellers, or put it in the ballot box, whatever the instructions might be. But it's important to give those instructions so that you don't have a lot of people confused. You don't have people writing a name or one letter or part name. And again, the instructions are up to the voting rules. But it is important so that there are no what we call invalid ballots, which would not be counted. Scenario 3 is the most difficult, okay, because here is where you do not have that letter F clause in your bylaws. There is no 2-day notice required. Therefore, anybody who wishes to, any member, can run from the floor for an office. So the president, again, will announce the nominating committee's choice for the office. The nominating committee will read their slate just as before, and the president will announce, for the office of president, we have Joe Santos. Are there any additional nominations from the floor? And then anybody can come and nominate themselves, self-nominate. yes, I would like to run for president, give their name, or someone could nominate them. I'd like to nominate Jane Doe for president, and Jane has to say, yes, I accept. Okay, so the person has to be there in order to accept the nomination there. Unlike the 2-day notice where they have a written information that they would like to run from the floor. Each candidate can be given the opportunity to speak according to the meeting rules. And I think this is important whenever you have 2 candidates running for an office, because you do want to hear a little bit about them. At Suffolk Region, we elect our nominating committee members from the general membership at our spring conference. The names are put up on a board, and then each of the candidates, possible candidates, is given a chance to go to the microphone and say a little bit about their PTA experience and why they want to be on the nominating committee. So it's important that you may not know the person, or somebody in the membership may not know them, but they get a little sense of what they've done and perhaps why they want to run. And as I said, the name should be written on a screen, or projected on a screen, or written on a board or easel clearly, so that everybody has the names and can write them down. Again, now ballots would be distributed, blank ballots, and instructions from the president. This is again important. So print first and last name of candidates, fold the ballot in half, hand the ballot to the teller, or put it in the ballot box, whatever your procedures are, but just so it's clear that this is the procedure for voting, again, to avoid the idea of, well, did they mean Joe? Did they mean Jane? They just put a J, and that becomes an invalid ballot, which negates that person's ballot. Once the results are announced, the election for that office is over, and the election for the next office can proceed until all officers have been elected. So again, taking one office at a time. Okay, if nobody runs from the floor for that office, then obviously it's done by voice vote. If there is a candidate or 2 that wish to run from the floor, then you must have a ballot vote at that time for that office. So then the results get announced. Tellers hand the tally sheet to the president, and the president announces the results. Total votes cast were 40. Needed for election is 21. It's by majority. Joe Santos received 25 votes. Jane Doe 11 votes. Invalid ballots 4. That could be somebody didn't write a complete name, maybe a blank ballot. Okay, but either way, Joe received a majority of votes, so you have elected Joe Santos as your president. Congratulations. And the secretary then records in the minutes the exact vote total for each candidate and the total votes, et cetera. So just as you see it here, that's the way the secretary should record it in the minutes. This process of nominations and elections can at times become highly contentious and spark controversy. Probably as a region director, the second most frequent phone calls that I received after finances was, they didn't do our election right, or we're having trouble with our election, or they didn't do the nominating committee right, and becomes very, very difficult and acrimonious among the members. So if your unit is concerned that there may be a contested or controversial election, you can contact your region director, and they will come in with their team and help you get through the election. And they are impartial and can do a better job and not have to worry about people saying, you know, this one favored this one. Having the election conducted by an impartial party can help to dispel any notion that the election is not being completed fairly. And it's so important, because transparency is the key here. By following the processes and procedures outlined here, you can assure that your membership that PTA is being transparent, and will enable them to have continued confidence in and support for their leadership. It is so important to maintain that support, because we have to have our members. Without our members, we can't do the things we need to do in PTA. And when members are confident that you are telling them what they need to be told and what they should be told, it makes a big difference, and it goes a long way to their confidence in their leadership. And again, everyone should know the process of nominations and elections. It's not just for the unit presidents. Everyone should understand the process and how it works. Any questions? And I'll be glad to follow up with any questions. At this time, you have my contact information there. And again, this will be recorded. This has been recorded and will be up on the website shortly.
Hi, Jackie, this is Rob. So we have quite a few questions that came in throughout the presentation. So thank you very much. I mean, some of them were answered as you were walking through them. Okay. But Kelly's my backup, so I'll try to go through as many as possible. And if I miss one, then she'll, I'm sure she has it jotted down. So the first one is, what defines notice for running from the floor? Can it be email or text?
It should be written, okay? And I would say an email is better because that can be printed out and saved by the nominating committee chair. So if you're sending an email that you wish to run from the floor, then it should be that can be printed out, and that's your proof of notice. So definitely written, or you could handwrite it, but with the 2-day notice, it might not happen. So the email is fine. I would not say text because text can be missed or whatever. But that's why I say having a separate email for the nominating committee chair is important, because then that's the only things that are coming to her on that email. And so if you want to run from the floor, it's not going to get lost among the other hundreds of emails that she might get in a day. And so therefore, that email specifically for the nominating committee chair is the one that would be sent to.
Okay, so then as they're preparing, I guess their notices that elections are coming up, then on the bottom it should say, please send any questions or request additional nominations to that email address, right?
That's what it said on the sample, right, in the sample notice that I had on there. Yes, it did say that. Yeah.
The other question is, how can we ensure your nominating committee members are a diverse group for your membership?
Very good question. It's important that if you feel that you want to make sure it's diverse, then as a person on, when it comes time to nominating somebody for the nominating committee, it's an election. Nominate somebody that you feel would be, very good. You're getting people from the general membership, and those people, there's a lot of, different people there that may not be your leaders or your committee chairs, who may come to volunteer, who may enjoy being at the school. Make sure either for yourself, you can self-nominate to run for the nominating committee, or you can choose someone that you feel would be, to make sure that you're getting a diverse group of people. But that's important. Membership, that's why I say membership needs to take ownership of this nominating committee process, so that the same people don't get nominated over and over again. That's why it's an election. And as I say, if you feel that you would do a good job, you can certainly self-nominate to be a part of that nominating committee.
I think that this next one, I think it's pretty much a challenge, and this is pretty common across a lot of PTSAs and PTAs. At the high school level, for example, this person's experience has been it's almost like begging people to step out, and not only to be officers, but even trying to get them to step up to be on the nominating committee. How do we, I'm sure everybody has experienced this at some point. Are there any ways to kind of overcome this?
If I had that way, I would certainly be making a lot of money. No, only kidding. One thing I would suggest is to ask people to attend trainings. Now, we have so many virtual trainings nowadays. It really is much easier than, I don't have time to go to a meeting or whatever, because the more people learn about PTA, the more they will see how important it is. I mean, we know what we've been through the last 2 years with schools and what our students have been missing. And nobody could not know that. But the more you learn about it, and the more you see the things that are not being done, or how our children are not being helped by being virtual, not having broadband, et cetera, the more you will hopefully generate interest. Bring in speakers from occasionally. You don't want to do that every single meeting, but bring in people from region or state. They're more than happy to come to your meetings. And there are so many people across the state that are leaders or have been leaders that can give you a lot of information. Why do you do this? Why have I done this for 35 years? Because I believe in what we do for children and for education. And if people have that passion, that's how to kind of pull that passion out of them and say, you know what, I could do this too. I could advocate, and maybe decide to run. But it is a very, very, very difficult question. And I know, having been a high school president, that was always a challenge, finding people to run, especially as their children get older. You don't feel you're as connected to the schools. But I would say try to get some programs in, or do a little 15-minute webinar on something like this, to show some of the things, the advocacy efforts we do. If you ever just, looked at what's been done in convention and some of the resolutions that we have passed, it's all about the children. That's what it should be. And hopefully you will find some people who have that interest in them and just spark or ignite that interest.
Thanks, Jackie. Just to add to that, I know high schools are a big challenge, and Kelly or anybody else can jump in as well at the state to kind of add some color to this. high schools always have their own, there's a lot of activities, sports, there's counseling dependent on those grades for the students as well. And their issues are different, much different, and the parent involvement is always also more of a challenge. So I've also found working with the administration, some of the teachers specifically that either run some of the clubs or some of the programs, sports or activities, they can be helpful also in endorsing or at least supporting the PTA in some of the activities, either to have a table or to be active or proactive and get some of that announcements out there and get more involvement and more involved parents. Also, the administration usually knows parents that are significantly involved, right? And they're in their children's education. So that's also a venue to kind of start targeting and identifying, potential leaders that can help and support your PTA grow within that high school. So.
And we also in our PTA used to have a couple of student members who were on our board, and they were from the student council. And so therefore they brought back what we did to the student council, which then of course gets back to the parents. So that was another connection that we tried to make with them. And we tried not to interfere with the sports club or the music group or whatever as much we can. But yeah, that collaboration is important.
Hi, Rob. I just want to, one of the things that were coming in the chat, first of all, I really, really appreciate that we're getting questions from the middle school and high school level, because we always think of elementary school, but we love that you're crossing over and you're asking those questions within those middle school and high schools. And one of the questions that someone had posted tonight is, how do we engage students that are coming up to the middle school or from the middle school to the high school? How do we engage them in the processes that we're doing at the high school or middle school level to engage those parents to be involved in the nominations and elections as they're going to be moving up? So when you were talking about membership is open year round for every single unit. Because you're a unit within a district, membership there doesn't mean you can't be a member at another level within your school district, but each one you have to be a member within that unit in order to vote. So that would be one thing to answer for that, since we were just talking about membership.
And the other thing is too, you'll have some sort of orientation. I know we do an orientation for 8th graders coming up to the high school, and they're with their parents, and have the PTA speak to them. Ask the president of the PTA at the high school or some members of the high school PTSA to come up and talk to them about what are some of the things that PTA has done to not only excite the students, but one of the funniest things we ever did that was so successful was a poster sale. And who knew? We tried it one year and it exploded, because that's what students wanted. They wanted to be able to buy posters. And who knows, some of these ideas and this came from our students, as a matter of fact, that we had on our board. So, it's important to engage the students. And like I say, announcing and introducing yourself at the orientations, whether it be from elementary to middle school or middle school to high school, can help as well.
There's also a question tonight with PTSA, so that's PT, SA. What positions can a student hold within the board?
The only 3 positions they cannot hold are president, secretary, and treasurer. So you can have them as a vice president. That's how we used to have a student vice president, 2 students vice presidents, and then we had a parent vice president. So they can hold any other positions. They can be committee chairs. They can work at your events. So any of those except for president, secretary, and treasurer.
Okay, so this next one is, how do schools usually inform members that they're accepting nominations? Is it email, member hub contacts?
All of the above. Yeah, however your unit communicates with your parents. Do you do it through the website? As I said, at the beginning of the year, make sure that you put 2 important dates on there. Of course, your election meeting and your meeting when you're going to elect the nominating committee. So people will know that, okay? And therefore they can put those dates on the calendar, but nothing wrong with blasting them out in email, putting them on your Facebook page. As we said, bulletin boards, of course, old school, I'm older, but certainly from newsletters and emails. Emails pretty much go out all the time. So I would say some sort of targeted email that's, got a special little thing added to it. And, oh, by the way, we're having this program coming up. And on the September 15th meeting, we will be, added to like an email that you're putting out there for a family night. Okay, that'd be a great way to kind of slip it in there. And when they're reading it, and, kind of do it colorfully. There's so many graphics you can use nowadays to kind of make it stand out and kind of look right within the email where you're going to announce some sort of family night program.
Yeah, and this one had so I'll twist the answer around, because Member Hub is such a key component to all of the community. because this question also referenced, it's the same members, right? We're electing the same people. How do we reach out beyond that? And so this is a good opportunity to get members that want to see a change, possibly in leadership and PTA or in membership or in activities, that they have an opportunity just to become members and have a voice and vote in it.
Right.
So it's also a venue for that.
And I saw Elena had a comment, Elena Rullo, our Southeastern Region Director, had a comment about asking your region director to come to a meeting and talk about the bigger picture. Okay, we're just units and councils, but there's a bigger picture. There's a region, there's a state. So that would be a great way to introduce your unit members to, oh, guess what? We have a region director and this is what they do. So, that's a great comment from Elena. Thank you for that.
This one's pretty simple. The nomination committee report to membership. Is this email to membership or is it just posted or?
Again, that is up to the committee, to the membership to decide, or I should say the executive board to decide when they write their procedures, okay? Procedures are important and the nominating committee should have procedures. And one of the procedures should say, how will we be sending out these recommendation forms? Old school was you always mailed them or sent them home with the backpack with a little envelope that meant, go back to the nominating committee chair. And that's one way to do it. But as I said before, Google Forms are great and you can have that special email. Only go to the nominating committee chair, send it out to your entire membership. We're accepting nominations for election to office. If you have any recommendations, please fill out this form and send it to this email address. So that's another way you can do it. Any place you have to advertise that, this is coming up, we need your input. Our leadership is only going to happen if we have members to support them. So please let us know who you think would be the best leaders. And just to do it multiple times throughout the year, as long as you know that it's, plenty of time for the nominating committee to get those recommendations. And of course, you have to have a date by which the nominating committee has to meet. So. And that could be recommendations for nominating committee too. Look, we're going to be, nominating our members for the nominating committee. If you wish to be a part of that, please come to the meeting or let us, know your name so we can put your name in nomination, et cetera. So for both of those things.
Okay. Jackie, this one, I think we've all seen some of the challenges over the last year and a half. And a lot of PTA officers that are in units right now don't want to see their leadership and the membership dismantled. So there's always concern of PTA shuffling or leadership shuffling. And it's always a challenge on getting more members. So what are some of the things that, and I guess it's a recurring theme, that PTAs can do to try to make sure we have different leadership within the election of officers, different memberships, because we don't want to leave, obviously, PTAs in bad standings.
Right, and that again is a challenge. The one thing I can say is you need to engage your membership in the process of elections. It's not just about showing up for the election meeting and voting. There has to be information out there constantly about this is our PTA, and if we don't do anything to support it, who's going to suffer? Not the parents, it's the kids. Okay, think of all these wonderful things. We have movie nights. We have, some of our partners in New York State PTA have sent out, information on free movies that, you can stream live. And we had that at convention for convention attendees. So these are some special things that don't really cost the PTA much, but our family engagement. There are so many family engagement activities that can be done. So many of our partners in New York State PTA that offer free nights for this or ideas for, for hands-on activities. You could also go through your local libraries. Libraries are great in supporting students. You know that, I know that. And they have all kinds of programs, and perhaps partner with the libraries for a reading night, a family reading night. The libraries would love it. The kids love it. Have your teachers come in and do reading nights. And just if you're engaging the students more and the families see how much this means to the students, they're hopefully not going to want the PTA to go away. I mean, you look at all the things, as I mentioned before, that have happened over these past 2 years. If we didn't have our PTA supports in many cases, we wouldn't have many of the programs that we were able to have. If you go back to, we did a webinar recently on family engagement and membership. There were some great ideas from that team about what do we do to engage families when we can't meet. And I would suggest you go back and look at that webinar on our website because it really had some excellent opportunities. The more you engage the kids with the parents, the more the parents are going to be interested in becoming part of the PTA. It's not a panacea, believe me, I understand the difficulty. But again, there has to be that connection between why are we doing this? We are doing this for the kids. And the more you can involve the kids, and then the kids bring in the parents, and then they say, oh, mom, you got to do this because I enjoyed that, family night we had, or I enjoyed seeing that movie or doing that activity. And I think that's where you get it. The problem is to get them in elementary school, which you get them pretty easily. But of course, the participation and so on wanes after that. Unfortunately, it's a lot harder, and there's no easy answer. But I think family engagement is the key here.
Yeah. Can I piggyback something that Jackie's just saying? We're talking about nominations and elections, and I know it gets to a struggle because now you have a nomination election process, but you're not getting volunteers, you're not getting the names. It's a great opportunity for you to take a health check on your PTA. Are you using terminologies constantly of we? Are you using you supported this program, you created this program? Because what happens is if you're already struggling to find people to fill your executive committee, a lot of times if you're doing the job and you keep saying we, then people are going to say, I'm really busy, so you keep doing it. So you want to make people, your members, feel engaged using the terminology of you and not just we. Okay, so it's really starting to port, because you have an opportunity to do the work and you sign up for an executive committee, you know that the work is going to be a lot more challenging, but we want to start building our leaders. We want your hardest job is to get people to want to do your job. Okay, so sometimes it's a little bit of a health check that we need to do if we're not getting the names and people wanting to be on those positions.
The other thing I would remind everybody is, yes, the first meeting, we have probably the biggest attendance, and you take down names for volunteers. Don't ever lose that list. Just say, well, we only need 2. Call them for something, okay? Because if a person gets a personal phone call, and I'm talking about a personal phone call, again, a lot of us are very bad and we don't do that often enough. But getting that personal phone call from someone saying, you know what? We really need some help at the book fair. I see that you volunteered for this, but could you possibly help us out at the book fair? Getting that personal phone call and asking the person personally is very, very effective. And I think that we have to remember. Don't just put the list aside and say, oh, look at all the volunteers we got, and then they never hear from you again. That turns a person off right away. So that personal phone call is very important. And I know it takes a lot more time, but the results are usually worth it.
This one's pretty straightforward. So there's always transition from middle school to high school. And it says, what incoming students present, are they disqualified if they're not a member of the specific unit, but a member of the feeder elementary schools? I think, again,
Are they, what did you say? I didn't understand
what you said.
Disqualified? Who, the parents?
Yeah, so if a child goes from their middle school to the high school and you're a PTA member,
right,
then you vote at the high school level if you came from the middle
you have to be a member to vote. That's the thing. Yeah, you have to be a member of that unit to vote in that unit, right? So as Kelly was saying before, there's nothing wrong with joining an additional unit, especially if your child's going to be in that unit. That's why I say the transition meetings with the 8th grade to 9th grade, or the 6th grade to 8th grade, whatever it is, introduce yourself so that the parents know that there is a viable, very active PTA in that particular school. And if they would like to be part of it, then they should, you could get membership right then and there. So. And with Member Hub, it's so easy to join any unit at this point. So,
right. This one is what happens if no one takes an open position? Can it be left open?
If it depends on what you're talking about. You must have a minimum president, secretary, treasurer. An open position stays open until someone's elected to it. Yes. So if it's not a president, treasurer, secretary, and you have a vice presidency that's open, each month at your executive board meeting, you would say, can I have any nominations for the office of vice president? If not, then it just stays open for the year. But you must have a president, secretary, treasurer. Those are the 3 offices you must have. But again, if it's a vacancy, you just keep asking each meeting, we need to find somebody to, become a vice president. Does anybody have any recommendations? Anybody would like to nominate themselves, et cetera.
All right. This one says, regarding email nominations, how do we redact the email of the person being nominated?
It should only be going to the nominating committee chair. So that's the only person that will see that along with the committee members. I'm not sure I understand. You don't want to send it out in general. That's why I said a specific recommendation form on a piece of paper that's only going to the chair, or a Google form that's only going to the chair. Okay. That would be the recommendation form. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because in the past, if you remember, if someone submits it in an envelope, that envelope does not get open until the nominating committee as a whole meets. So it's
right.
so
the
that
email
does
could
cause a challenge, but it would really be because that person is the chairperson for the nominating committee.
Right. So you would do it only to the email to the nominating committee chair, and they would leave them unopened until the day of the meeting. That's basically what is done. So they just put them in a folder, and then, you know, I know it's not necessarily as anonymous, if you will, but Google form would be anonymous because you don't know who sent the Google form. So that's a Google form is good because it is anonymous. And so you would just put them in a folder, those for president and so on, those for vice president, and then they all get looked at by the committee on your first meeting.
Okay, I think you answered this one already with, is there a time limit for the candidate for an open position? I think you said the position will stay open, depending on the position itself.
Right, exactly, yeah.
If
Unless,
we have-
yeah. And again, if you're really having difficulty getting someone for one of the three main officers, three necessary officers, I should say, you know, bring your region director in as was suggested before, to talk a little bit more about PTA and hopefully drum up some, you know, just tell people we can't operate the PTA without a president. We can't operate the PTA without a treasurer. And our other alternative would be to dissolve it. Do you want to see the PTA dissolve? And that sometimes really wakes people up to say, no, we really need this PTA, okay? Especially in these past couple of years with the pandemic, you know, we need PTA to be there to support our children and make sure that we get, you know, what they need, you know, for everybody to be able to learn no matter where they live.
So with the scenarios you covered, if in the bylaws it specifies they have a 2 business day requirement, as far as notice, they don't have to worry about nominations from the floor, right?
Right. If there's no 2-day notice, then there are no nominations from the floor, right? And again, that part of it is up to the membership to decide if that's how they want to run the election. That's really why the bylaws go to the general membership for approval. And if you don't like that or you want to add it, then you have to have a bylaws amendment. So, you know, that's up to the membership to decide. Yes, we like the idea of the 2-day notice. It gives us preparation time, or no, we want to have nominations from the floor. So let's take that out. And then you can always have nominations from the floor if you don't have that 2-day notice. But that is a requirement in your bylaws, so make sure that you take a look at the bylaws. Again, any member has the right to a copy of the unit's bylaws.
I have one I wanted to add, because we see a lot of requests for the video and when they can watch it again. But let's talk about everybody that's on here, because there's a lot of wealth of information here that they're receiving tonight, and I know they want to go back and they're excited to share. But what if now that we're in that second half of the year, they weren't able to follow those processes of starting to get their nomination committees from our general public? You know, those steps haven't been put into play already. Where can they begin now to set things forward so that they have a successful nominations and elections at the end?
Well, if they're too late, they better start now. Better late than never. That's what we always say. If you have not started the process, and let's say your election month is March, you've still got time, okay? It's only January. But if you don't start the process in time, better doing it than not doing it at all. So whenever you are able to get started, certainly those recommendations are there for a reason. You're giving your nominating committee, enough time, at least 60 days to meet. And of course, with weather and so on, not so bad now because we can Zoom meet, but you want to make sure that they have enough time to complete the slate. So the sooner they start, the better. The sooner you elect them, the better. If you haven't done it and it's, time you should have, get it done at your next general meeting.
Jackie, just to follow up with that, because I'm sure some units last year with the COVID ran into this as well, where they couldn't get a nominations committee or they couldn't get a slate open. So do those officers maintain, I guess, going forward until the new slate or nominations can be established?
At this point, they should have been able to have a nominating committee. Now it's already past September. So I would say they contact their region director for assistance. But, once we got into September and most, units were able to at least be on Zoom, they should have been able to have some sort of election. So if they haven't already done so, if they need assistance, Again, our COVID-19 page on the website has a lot of information, but certainly we have a lot of information that can come from region directors who have been doing Zoom calls, for the past 2 years, so they can certainly assist them. But absolutely get it done right away. If your elected officers are finished their term, then yes, you should be having an election as soon as possible.
Right. Ballots and should ballots from the election meeting be kept or just recorded in the meeting minutes?
Okay, ballots are generally held for 30 days, but you can make a motion to destroy the ballots. So a motion can come from the floor to destroy the ballots, or they can be held for 30 days generally, and then they get destroyed. So if you feel there was an impropriety with the election, sometimes it's good to save the ballots so that in case it needs to be a recount or a revote. But generally, you can just make a motion to destroy the ballots.
Jackie, can you speak to if someone is already on the nominating committee, but their name is coming up for a position? We've seen in the past people say that I was told that I couldn't take on a position because I was part of the nominating committee. Can you give them some steps that they can utilize during that situation?
I'm not sure I get your question, Kelly. They're on the nominating committee. They can be nominated for an office. That's not a problem.
Sometimes the question comes up because people think that they can't take a position because they're on a committee. So
No.
what would someone do in that situation? Something that it's happened to me before is that I excuse myself from the conversation. So
yes.
I would walk out of
I did mention that. Yes, if a nominating person on the nominating committee is being considered for an office, they go out of the room, they get off the Zoom call, whatever, and then their name is discussed. Absolutely. But there's no reason that if they are eligible for an office that they can't be nominated. There's no conflict of interest there. They just do not enter into the discussion about their qualities or qualifications.
I'm scanning through the other questions.
Going back, just saying with Jackie that, if they didn't have an opportunity to start the process of getting their nominating committee, starting now, if you are a unit, please reach out to your council. If you don't have a council, you can always reach out to your region. So there are people there to support you. There's definitely resources to get you forward into that process. So don't put it to the side because it didn't get done. We really want to encourage you to start doing that process. It also gives people, if your general public, a time, and who is on your nominating committee, time to watch what's going on so that they have a more information to make those decisions during those committee meetings.
Absolutely.
This one's interesting. Are non-members allowed to nominate members?
Anybody can recommend somebody. Recommendations are anonymous, so yes, they can come from non-members. Yes.
It's the voting that you have to be a member.
The voting is the key, that they have to be members to vote and they have to be a member to be elected. Yes. But anybody can nominate somebody. Yes.
So I think the RD question was answered. It's great to have a region director there on your meetings as well, or even a council unit when possible to kind of show support. The presentation will be available. If the nominating committee gets multiple recommendations by a single position, do they have to nominate each person?
The recommendations are just that. They're recommendations. Okay. Each person name is looked at, names come up, but the ultimate decision is up to the nominating committee. Okay. It does not have to be a recommended name. Right. It doesn't have to go by, oh, this person got 5 recommendations. She only got 3. It's all about what you believe as a committee is the person for the best person for the job. That is a great question, because that does come up, because a lot of times and it's been a misconception that if one person gets 50 and someone gets 1, that you have to go with the 50, and that's not, because your job on that nomination is to find the best candidate for the position. So please, there is no stacking the ballots when it comes to that. And I think people don't understand that. So that's a great training that you can do with your units as well. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with, before the process starts, that, you have a little conversation with your membership and say, this is the process, this is how we're going to do it. So again, the transparency is important. If you want to keep your members, if you want to engage your members, they need to know what's going on. Bylaws are not a secret document, okay? Nominations and elections are not secret documents about how to do the process, okay? So you want them to know what's going on so that they feel engaged in the process. If they don't know what's going on and they're just handed a ballot, they're not going to feel as if they're part of the PTA as the way they should be.
So Jackie, I'll challenge this one a little bit as well and throw a bit of a monkey wrench, because if there's a candidate that got 50 nominations that they strongly feel that they should be on the board, and the nomination committee decided that they're potentially, there were better candidates, or they're not potentially the best candidate, then do they have the option, I guess, to nominate from the floor and then try to go and get votes on the floor?
Absolutely, that's the thing. You never deny the right of a person to run from the floor, because they have the option of either if they have not been nominated and they truly believe they would be a better candidate, they run from the floor, either with the 2-day notice. Of course, they will know, and that's why you need to publish a slate ahead of time, so that this person knows that obviously they would know they were not nominated, but they know who is nominated, so that they can decide whether or not they would be a better candidate than that person. And they absolutely have the right to run from the floor. So you never take away the right of the membership itself to self-nominate or nominate somebody else, either with the 2-day notice or from the floor. Depends on your bylaws. But no, we never do that, because that would be unfair to the membership. Again, that's why you need to engage a membership in the process, so they know what happens. Why can she run from the floor? I thought she wasn't nominated. You need to make sure that they understand the process.
Correct. And I thank you. And I think that addresses the recommendation versus nomination questions, and also positions and ballots.
Mhm.
Is there anything I missed, Kelly or Kyle?
I see the question going back to when you're on the nominating committee and your name is up for a position. When do you actually leave the room? And in practice, it's been when your name is being discussed. You still have a right to be participating in those discussions, even leading up to yourself. But it's best to excuse yourself, so that there could be a conversation without your presence, and then you come back.
Right.
It's
You're only when your name is being discussed, right?
Yes. Good follow-up.
How can you ensure a person was nominated before they, I'm not sure about that question. Maybe that was an interesting question here. Let me see. How can you ensure a person knows they were recommended before they get nominated by the committee? They can recommend themselves. I mean, there's nothing wrong with writing yourself a recommendation if you feel you're a good candidate. You won't know, but technically you won't know unless you've done the recommendation yourself.
Sure. And that goes back to what Jackie was saying before. When the nomination committee meets, they will call the candidates that they would like to get some more information for, or to make a proposal for them to, but at the same time, they can't ask, well, did so-and-so get it? Because I'll take it if so-and-so
you don't know,
right.
That's right. It's really not meant to be, well, I'll only take the office if this one is nominated. Then is that the kind of person you want, who doesn't want to work with anybody? You want to make sure you have people going to work together. And if they'll only be a president if so-and-so is a vice president, then maybe that's not the right person for the job. So
sure. I just want to mention that Rob is our leadership development coordinator. So even at the state level, there is so many interviews, there's so much research that gets done before a candidate is put forward. So, the state level is a quality level. I'm just so impressive at the process that the team has done last year. But on a lower scale, you still have the same opportunity to research, to look into, get recommendations. And that's why it's great to elect a nomination committee early on, so that they can follow throughout the year and have a better insight into the quality of their candidates.
Another question said, does the recommendation have to include the preferred role, or can the committee determine a suitable role for the candidate? Sure, you can just recommend, I highly recommend this person for a leadership position. I'm sure they would do well no matter what they are nominated for. So certainly you can do it as just a general nomination, not necessarily for president, secretary, or whatever. Absolutely. Just so that person's name is out there and people take a look at them. And, especially if they're getting a few other people, who know them and who know their leadership skills and how they might best serve the unit. So, yeah. Cannot put someone on the slate unless they've contacted and are accepted the nomination. Yes, they must have a verbal acceptance and then a written acceptance. Yes, otherwise they're not going to be put on the slate. I mean, you're not going to nominate somebody who's not agreed to serve. That doesn't make sense, because you want to nominate those people who really do want to be that officer. So yes, they have to accept the nomination. Very
important what Jackie just, it's not just the acceptance from the verbal, it is also a written acceptance, and that's very, very important.
Right. If they cannot attend the meeting, okay, you don't have them to say yes, But yes, you have it in writing, so therefore that is important. You do have it in writing that they've accepted, to be nominated.
Yeah, it goes back to, thanks, Jack. And again, it's a critical role of the nominating committee role. I know there's a question, Wendy, I'm noting your question as well on the importance of the candidates, speaking a little bit about themselves or having been given the opportunity, if they're nominated from the floor, to have some floor time and talk about their candidacy and the difference they can make. So it is also part of the nominating committee to not only as they select the best candidates, right, to also reach out and speak to the folks that they are considering to put forward on the slate as well.
Yes.
To kind of build that connection and that relationship. So we definitely want to reemphasize the role and the importance of the nominating committee and why it's important when you select those candidates to be representative of the leadership that they'll be selecting going forward or recommending to the slate and the membership. So that's very critical.
I did put my contact information in the chat for you as well. So if you need any additional questions, you can contact me at that. And one last question that I just saw said, if you are nominated, if you're elected for an office or position for 22-23, do you have to be a 21-22 member of that school? You need to be a member at the time of election, okay? So you need to join the PTA prior to your election. And that's especially important for a transition school. So yes, you need to be a member at the time of the election.
Great. So I'll let Kelly close it on, and if Dana wants to say a few words. But again, I really want to thank everybody for joining us on the LD webinar series.
Thank you for the great questions too.
Yeah, very important topic. And Jackie, excellent job. Feel free to, she put her email out there so you can always reach out to us. The webinar will be available for additional viewing later on. And again, any other questions that you have in between, feel free to just reach out to us. Kelly?
I just want to thank both Rob and Amani tonight. Rob is our leadership development coordinator, and Jackie is our leadership training specialist. Two phenomenal people to be on here tonight, and I'm so thankful, and I hope that you've really gained some knowledge that you really needed. It will be posted on our webpage, the entirety. We all got the post that it was being recorded. So from then on, it will be recorded. Also look on the New York State PTA website for our resource guide for any guidance that you need. Any forms that we can provide for you will be included in there as well. And you can also, Rob's email address was added to the chat box. You can reach out to Rob and any questions or concerns that you need. But thank you so much. We had a fantastic program for you tonight, and we had a lot of attendees. So what a wonderful evening this was.
Thank you all for
Thank you so
attending.
much.
Appreciate that. Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.